gentlemen, as you can see.
E aí, descobriu o erro? Hoje vou mostrar para vocês que tamanho é documento, sim, pelo menos na língua inglesa. E na minha língua, a gente tem palavras diferentes para expressar o tamanho das coisas. São substantivos da mesma classe que já contêm em si a ideia de sua dimensão. E se você usar o substantivo errado, você vai passar ideia errada. Como aconteceu com minha aluna. Dá uma olhada.
Ano passado eu fiz uma viagem para a Escócia com uma amiga, foi incrível. A gente queria conhecer o país com outro olhar, os lugares mais inóspitos, então a gente decidiu alugar um carro. A gente sempre colocava no GPS o centro da cidade porque era a maneira mais fácil da gente se localizar. Um dia a gente estava numa cidadezinha bem pequenininha, no meio do nada, e o GPS simplesmente parou de funcionar. Então a gente precisava de ajuda. A gente viu uma senhora se aproximando, parou o carro e perguntou: "Please, where is the city center?" E ela, com uma cara de espanto, olhou pra gente e falou: "This is not a city, this is a villa."
Cláudia, não vou falar nada. Bem, em português, você também tem palavras para definir o que é uma cidade ou um vilarejo. Mas eu tenho a impressão de que vocês não usam elas e acabam chamando tudo de cidade. Às vezes, só as matas sim. Vamos ver em inglês. In today's video, we're not going to be looking at grammar. Yay! We're going to be looking at vocabulary and lots of it. And we're going to be looking at words that are important for your vocabulary base. That's words that you need for day-to-day conversations. To start the video, we're going to look at the expression which is to make a mountain out of a molehill. And that's when you make a small problem, seem much bigger than it really is. And in Portuguese, you call this fazer tempestade em copo d'água. And the first question you're going to ask me is, Crispin, what is a mole? A mole is this here. And a mole lives under the ground, and as it's digging its little hole, it creates mounds of earth on top of the ground. And in this expression, you're describing this small mound on the floor as a mountain. Now, if we isolate the words mountain and hill, we get examples of words that represent one idea, in this case, one land form, but show different sizes. A hill, morro, is a small landmass, while a mountain, montanha, is a huge landform. In fact, there are quite a few words that function like this. For example, a wood, bosque, which is a group of trees together, but which is a relatively small space. And then as it grows, it becomes a forest, floresta, which is basically lots of trees together in a large space. We have stream, riacho, which as it grows becomes a river, rio. We have pond, which is lago, and as it gets bigger, it becomes a lake, which is lagoa. In fact, today's video is looking at Claudia's error, and it's not just Claudia's error. My most basic students to my most advanced students all make this error, which is calling everything, every urban area, a city. And for English people, you need to use the correct word to represent the correct size of urban area. Two things to say before we begin. Number one, the TEFL and the IELTS examination board love to use these words in their oral question. Some people prefer to live in a small town. Others prefer to live in a big city. Which place would you prefer to live in? Use specific reasons and details to support your answer. Second fact is, in the United Kingdom, that's England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, there are over 48,000 urban areas. And of those 48,000, only 69 are cities, only 1,200 are towns, and the rest are villages and hamlets. Let's look then at these different words. Now, we could look at these different urban areas based on population, but let's be honest, if you walk up to someone and ask them, "Excuse me, could you tell me the population of this urban area, please?" they're going to think you're weird. So I'm going to give you another way in which to judge, to differentiate between these different words. The easiest one is the hamlet. It's very small. It's a group of houses together, and there's no church, there are no shops, perhaps there's a postbox. Now, as a hamlet grows, it becomes a village, which means there are lots of houses, there's one church, there's usually a pub or two pubs, there's a shop, a grocery store, a post office, and the centre of the village where people meet together is called the green, which is a grassy space, campo. Now, the equivalent here would be the praça, a square, but in England, these praças, these squares, aren't very common. Now, to give you some examples, here in São Paulo, on the Litoral Norte, on the north coast, that would be places like Camburi, Maresias, Juquí, or Boiçucanga. Now, as a village grows, it turns into a town. It has more houses, it might begin to have apartment blocks, it'll have more shops and more famous shops, bigger shops like McDonald's or department stores. And examples of towns here on the north coast would be places like Bertioga, São Sebastião, or Caraguatatuba. Finally, town grows and becomes a city, and a city is a hugely densely populated space. You'll have a city centre, a downtown, you'll have different neighbourhoods to the city, you'll have affluent or rich neighbourhoods, you'll have poor or low income neighbourhoods. You'll have the inner suburbs, that's residential areas close to the city centre, or you'll have outer suburbs which are on the outskirts of the city. Obvious examples would be São Paulo, would be Guarujá, Santos, or Mogi das Cruzes. Finally, a word that we haven't mentioned here is a metropolis. I never heard London described as a metropolis. However, a metropolis is a huge city, highly populated, and São Paulo would be a perfect example. What if you don't live in the city and you live no interior, which is a word people have problems translating? Well, you live in the countryside. If you want to be more informal, you could call it the sticks. I live in the sticks, na roça. And if you live in a particularly isolated area, you might say that you live in the middle of nowhere, no meio do nada. Finally, to finish the video, a word that leaves lots of my students confused on how to translate it is the word sítio. Now, you have your house in the city or in a town where you live, perhaps you have another house in the countryside, and we'd call this place your holiday home or your vacation house, or even your second home. If this place has farm animals, cows, chickens, etc., then you can call it a farm. Bem, espero muito que esse vídeo tenha sido útil para vocês, e sempre lembrando que se você quiser, o material complementar está disponível no link abaixo. Falou!